Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to another Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Allan Bevere, your host, and this is another episode of Calmly Considered, one of the few places where you can get calmly considered conversation. We banish to outer darkness the snake oil salesmen and women, the peddlers of snake oil on cable news. And we refuse to get involved in that kind of, sophistry. Let me use a big word I haven't used in a while.
There we go. That's a fun
And
word.
the gravitas, the gravity, the anchor of our rational, reasonable conversation here at Calmly Considered is the one and only Michael Cruz. Who is always always here to keep us grounded. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Allan?
I'm doing great.
Good.
So we got a couple things happening in the world of sports. We're coming up on opening day, which is just a real great thing, and I'm excited about it. I have to confess, I'm not overly hopeful that my Guardians are going to make a big impact toward the playoffs this year, but I'm also just excited to be able to go to a game and sit outside in the balmy evening and watch the boys of summer. So
You bet.
you have higher hopes out there in Kansas City.
They have really built us up with some big hopes here. They better deliver. So.
Yeah.
But it does look promising. We got some, they've pulled in some good players, and Bobby Witt's been signed to a extensive contract, and Benny Pasquantino, otherwise known as Pasquatch, he's back now from his injury last year, and so we'll see. They'll be, like you say, it's more about the fun of just being able to get out and enjoy the community that surrounds baseball.
Nothing like it. Nothing like it. Nothing like it. Baseball in the summertime. And of course, March Madness has started and just got underway. And I like March Madness. I'm not a huge basketball fan.
Right.
But I like March Madness. I just think it's interesting because you just never know. When you watch these games, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. College basketball is one of those sports where the fortunes can turn really quick.
It sure can. Yeah.
Yeah.
My Kansas State Wildcats are not in the tournament this year. They were pretty bad. However, the Iowa State Cyclones, which is Melissa's alma mater, I think they could go to the Final Four. I my brackets, I picked them to win it all. We'll see.
Did you? Good for you, the eternal optimist. Well, I'm not expecting my Blue Devils to go too far into it this year. They're too hit and miss. I think on paper they've got some serious talent, but boy, they just have underperformed.
Yeah,
and they might make it to the Sweet 16, but boy, I don't know. We'll see. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll see. All right. Well, let's get on to the subject of hand. We'll go from talking about the youth of sports to the silver tsunami, Michael. We're going to talk about the silver tsunami today. You and I are part of the silver tsunami. We are in that group. So let's talk a little bit about that. When people talk about the silver tsunami, what are they referring to?
Yeah, talking about the population is aging, and by that we mean that the distribution of the population is moving to the older end versus the younger end of the population, and that has a number of consequences. People banter around the term baby boomers all the time. And of course, going from the late 1940s and the early 1960s, there was an explosion in number of babies being born. I think in 1957, the fertility rate was like 3.6 children per woman at that time. And now it's like 1.8. So almost half the number of children being born per woman as there were back when we were kids, when we were children. And the net effect of that is that as you have a whole bunch of children, when you move 60 years down the pipeline in terms of the population, that becomes a rather large elderly population if you haven't been having the same number of children along behind as those people have gotten older. And so what we're starting to see is a disproportionate number of people that are in their senior years. And so that's one of the criticisms of the term silver tsunami is almost universally linked as a negative thing. It's a destructive, force, and there are going to be challenges. But the upside of that is that people are living longer. They're living longer productive lives in terms of the things that they want to do, and living longer in total. And there are some positive things I think that come from that as well. So tsunami may not be the best term, but it is definitely going to be a transformative influence in our society, our economy.
Yeah, and and this is a global issue too. It's not just America, it's not just Europe, that in general, the global population is aging.
Right. And I think when you look over human history, it was always that population would grow a little bit, and then you would have famine, you'd have disease, you'd have war, that type of thing, which always bring the population back into balance. And populations never grew much. But in the past 200 to 300 years in particular, even extending further back than that, but really in the past couple hundred years, what you've seen is just this tremendous explosion in population. And that's because we figured out things about medicine, about economic productivity, being able to produce food and other goods that help people survive. And so people were having the same number of children they were before. It's just overwhelming majority of them started living to adulthood and having children themselves. And we first saw this develop in Western nations, Western Europe, United States, where you have this explosion in population, and then people begin to adjust the number of children they had downward. But that took a while. And so the Western world is the first one to experience this thing where we're now no longer having this issue of where we're having more children than we need to replace us, but we're having fewer children than we need to replace us. And we sort of crested that in the Western world. Other parts of the United States, other parts of the world are sort of in between place, and then you have a few places, sub-Saharan Africa, where high numbers of children being born is still the reality. And so it's a mixed bag all over the world, but the whole world during this century is transitioning towards becoming a much older world.
Yeah, and that certainly obviously has implications, as you say. One of the things we talk about living longer, and we are living longer than ever before. One of I've been reading lately different articles, different places, research on this. And one of the things that's being said is that for what we're seeing is that, for a fairly high percentage of people, I want to be careful how high I say, but, the ages of 60 to 80 tend to be extremely productive years.
Yes,
right. So it isn't just that, the tsunami, that is a negative thing that those of us who are in that category will become a burden in a sense.
Right.
But we're like, we're productive. We're doing things and we're contributing. And whether that's people are working longer, and there are people who are doing that, but whether it's people like me who have recently retired who are moving into different areas. So there is a there's an upside here.
Yes.
To having a population of people who are in the last 20, 25 years of their lives because of what they're doing and accomplishing.
Exactly. Yeah. I can't count the number of people that I've known that are, and by the way, I just went on Medicare this month. So this is I'm right at the heart of that silver tsunami, but I can't count the number of people I know my age and just slightly older who have retired from professional careers and then immediately turned around and gone back and taken consulting work to do either portions of the job they did before, maybe not even necessarily with the same company, but doing the same type of work that they did before on a more flexible part-time basis. And so they are still contributing to the economy, maybe not in the full extent that they were before they retired, but they're still making contributions. And also just in terms of the skills and professionalism that people can bring to volunteer work and to the societal good through those types of activities, you're increasing the pool of people that are available to do that as people age and retire. So
yeah, and that's it's interesting to why wouldn't you if you have somebody who's got 30 to 40 years of experience in an area, gosh, why wouldn't you want to seek their counsel? regard whatever field it might be, right? Why
Right.
wouldn't you want to
Sure.
be able to glean from that?
Right.
Uh, it makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
So, we do need to talk a little bit about the challenges this is going to present. So,
Sure.
obviously, financial challenges are what's often mentioned.
Right.
We're drawing Social Security. More of us are drawing it than putting in, as it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago, and healthcare costs and things like that. So what are the challenges? Let's say now let's get some dates here. So the boomers, right? We're the ones who are retiring. Although
Right.
although although boomers are also working longer. I mean, that needs to be
That's
said.
right. That's
Boomers are
right.
working longer. But you do have you just got on Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare, and I'm two
Medicare.
and a half. I'm 2.5 years behind you.
Yeah.
Um, well, let's talk Social Security first. You
Yeah.
and I you and I did a program on Social Security, and
Right.
it's not as dire as some want to make it, but that doesn't mean there aren't challenges.
Right.
So what are
Sure.
the challenges for Social Security coming up in the next 30, 40 years?
Well, I think the challenge is the funding. They in economics they talk about the worker dependency ratio, and so they take the number of people in the society that are 15 years old to 65 years old, and those people are considered the working age population. Those that are under 15 are too young to work to support themselves, and generally, at least in the past, it was considered those over 65 were getting too old to be as productive as they once had been, and many would not be productive at all. Go back to, I think it was 1940. I think I was reading that 1940, the life expectancy at age 65 was like 11 or 12 years. Life expectancy today at 65 is 18 years. So you have people living considerably beyond that. But still, the definition that they use for the worker dependency ratio is those that are 15 to 65 versus those who are not. And so when we were kids, the imbalance was that you had so many children. So you had
Mhm.
to have all the support network that dealt with having children, which meant building more schools, more daycare, more colleges, all those type of things as those kids age. And so it is because you had this big expansion in number of children, a lot of resources were sucked that direction. But the population was also growing at the time. So you have more people coming in, more workers coming in behind those that were dying. So you were also having more income to draw from. The problem we have now is that we have children are less the issue in terms of dependency, and seniors now become more the issue. And that's going to keep increasing as we go into the middle part of this century. And so then the challenge becomes, do you have the support network that's needed for having a disproportionately high number of dependent people that are seniors versus those that are younger? And so we've got Social Security, and the workers that are paying in now theoretically are paying for the Social Security of those who are currently retired, and then the ones that come behind them will pay for theirs. And theoretically, I mean, in the letter of the law, we're supposed to be paying into a lockbox, so to speak, of money that we paid in. That's our money that will be given distributed back to us by the government. I think we all know that that's not exactly how it works, but
Yeah.
that's the theory of how it was set up. But effectively, the people have to keep funding the Social Security trust fund that's there. And the challenge is that as more people retire, you're putting more strain on the system, and you have fewer workers that are making contributions. And so, at some point, you have to make some shift. The age at which you receive Social Security has to go up. Taxes, Social Security taxes have to go up. There are a couple other options, to think about in terms of how this all works. But you could do instead of, well, one of the things was the idea that we have people that once you make a certain amount, you no longer pay Social Security. So you could just have Social Security paid by, no matter what your salary is, how high it goes, that would add to the Social Security fund. I don't know which thing is the one that will happen, what will need to happen, but one of those or multiples of those then have to be adjusted in order to make Social Security solvent. And that's kind of where we're at now. The rhetoric, at least that I hear among the Democratic Party, is the idea that we're not going to make any Social Security cuts. No way, Jose. Never. whatever. And then on the Republican side, you have the idea of wanting to cut Social Security benefits, of trying to, scale back, no new taxes, that kind of stuff. So at some point, they have to come to a conclusion about doing something that perpetuates the program in the future, and I'm sure they will when they have to, but probably not before.
Well, that's the way it always works. We don't do these things
Right.
till we absolutely have no choice, and no politician wants to have Social Security fold on their watch, so they're going to do
Right.
something about it.
Right.
What do you think of? Not sure whether this is going to happen, but there has been, and you mentioned it, the suggestion that we take the cap off of Social Security payments. That if
Right.
if you make $2 million a year after taxes, you should pay 7.5% to 15%, depending if you're self-employed, if you're making that kind of money. 15%. If I cleared $2 million, Michael, I wouldn't miss 15%.
Right.
At least, I mean, I wouldn't think I'd miss 15%. If I did, I'm not so
Right.
sure. I'm not so sure that says much for my own stewardship. What do you think of that idea? I mean, it does seem like a fairly easy solution that, frankly, I would think, and I'm looking at it as a person who doesn't have that kind of money, that I would think be pretty painless.
I would think so. You'll have some people that obviously are going to complain about it's going to be more out of their paycheck. I'm not. The question I have, and I have not looked into this, I didn't research this before coming here, was I don't know how big an impact that alone would have on improving solvency. So you're looking for things that are the least painful that provide the biggest buck, whatever that combination is. And so, I mean, I think I'm open to that. But for me, I guess with all of these things, I want to see what the relative numbers are. For fairly modest increases in Social Security withholding, I think you could make the whole system solvent again. But the problem is getting the political will to do something like that. So my guess is it could be something like that combined with something like you were just talking about, or some other things. I do think that there is a value for all of us, regardless of income, to have skin in the game. That when I am contributing to the system, which not only benefits me, but it benefits others who will be receiving it, that they have some skin in the game for everyone. And make it proportionate is important. I had a friend who was an American. She lived in England for a while, and one of the things she said to me, she said, even in England, when it comes to taxes, the poor pay something. And in America, 50% of those on the lower end of the income pay no taxes. Right.
And of course, we could argue about how much the rich pay and how much they should pay. But the point she was just simply trying to make was that when everybody proportionally has some skin in the game, this makes a difference.
Yeah, sure. Right.
And so it does seem to me that all of us should, at some point, if we're going to receive from this, we should all contribute in some way. To me, that's how the common good should function.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I think part of it is how we've conceptualized various types of taxes, the way Social Security is set up originally, which was sort of an insurance program where you paid in and you got your money back later. Effectively, we've already kind of moved away from that. I think we have to probably get to the point where we say, okay, it no longer is that, which we aren't willing to say yet. And make this a slightly different type of program that cares for people that are in their senior years. So
no, I think that's right. I think that's important. We do need to say that. So let's talk about the healthcare thing. Medicare, Medicaid. When you hit 65, you go on Medicare. If you don't have other kind of insurance, and I'll be there in 2.5 years, you're there. Part A, which is hospitalization, there's no premium for that, although there are deductibles, things like that. Part B, there's a monthly premium, right, for those who are involved in it. Right. By the way, I will tell you this, Michael. Everybody I've known who's on Medicare over the years, even though there'll be things they complain about it, nobody hates it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is the one thing I always want to say to people when they start dissing Medicare, you know,
Right.
whatever. As I want to say, I said, I don't care what their politics is. Everybody I
Right.
know who is on Medicare
Yep.
wants it.
Yep. In some ways, it's a lot simpler. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and and
And
and
not
so
paying
yeah,
for
so
it. I mean,
it's like
yeah.
anything. It's like anything. It's got its issues,
Right.
you know, it's by and large you just have to argue that over the years, again, given the inadequacies, which there's always is in anything like this, by and
Right.
large it's worked. It seems like it's worked.
Right.
So well, let me stop there in case you want
Yeah.
to rebut that. Yeah.
Well, I think there's some qualifications, and again, a part of the aging population is going to create increasing challenges. The Advantage Plan, which is the most popular right now in terms of a supplemental insurance to cover the cost that Medicare doesn't cover. The Advantage Plan is probably the most popular. And I've seen a number of stories in the past couple of years that have talked about there are challenges that are being presented with the Advantage Plan. Advantage Plan requires prior approval before you get many procedures done, medications prescribed, that type of thing. So it requires prior approval. And there are stories, and it varies from insurer to insurer, about them denying coverage when it is proposed, and then people who appeal, like 85% of the time, their appeal is approved. They get the stuff anyway. But the process of having to get pre-approval, then you get denied, then you have to file a appeal, then you have to get that approved. That can take a while. And on the medical providers end, where they're having to deal with doing all of this, the backroom work of all the paperwork to deal with that, can be very costly and expensive. And so one of the things we've seen is several hundred hospitals in rural areas in particular have closed. They just said, we're not profitable anymore because we can't handle the backroom stuff of dealing with all of this, the stuff that happens with these Advantage plans. And so you have some issues developing there. There's also a supplement plan, which is more expensive, which you pay a couple $1,000s a year maybe to have that plan, but you don't have to worry about pre-approval. You don't have to worry about being in networks. If Medicare approves it, you get it, and so then you don't have all this issue of third party denying things and then having to appeal and so on. And I say that only to say, as you're emphasizing, nothing's perfect. There are some problems and there are some challenges, but like you said, overall, Medicare is a very popular thing across the political spectrum. And so I forget where you wanted to go with that, but I just say that I do think that it is a popular plan. And I think people are wanting to keep it and support it.
Yeah, no, I when my wife worked at it, she did office work, and she did all kinds of that paperwork of submitting things for an eye clinic,
Right.
or I'm sorry, a hearing clinic.
Hearing
And
clinic.
they stopped taking Medicare because they just
Right.
said, we're not doing it. We are the
Yeah.
paperwork is just ridiculous.
Yep.
And the getting turned down the first time and having to go through all that again, and then finally getting it approved the second time, they just
Right.
finally said, we're not doing it. And
Right.
so on that end, something there needs to get better. Now, will it get better?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, government and paperwork tend to go together.
Right.
But the reality is that, there are issues that need to be solved. But I mean, for me again, it's always not making the perfect the enemy of the good.
Exactly.
And that I think it's good, but we admit there are things that can get better, and it would get better if Congress would do something. But Congress, Congress is Congress, and
right.
They tend only to act in their own interest,
right,
their own competing interests. So what are going to be now? So let's just talk about that healthcare wise. Over the next 20 years with this silver tsunami, 25 years, obviously there are going to be challenges. What are some of the specific challenges that we'll be looking at?
Well, I think just the general sense of, you think as people get older, they have more and more health issues that have to be addressed. And so what you're going to have is there are more issues that are presenting to doctors' offices. You're going to need more doctors. You're going to need more healthcare workers. You're going to need more assisted living facilities with the employees that work in those assisted living facilities. You're going to have a big demand on the economic system to provide those services, to transition to providing more of those. And so the question is, do you have enough workers, and can you incentivize enough workers to be able to meet that demand? Again, we're back to where we were 60, 70 years ago, when you had to build more grade schools and you had to get more teachers, and you had, it's the same thing that as the baby boomer moves through each life stage, that we've had this all the way through. And so now the big issue becomes, how are we going to manage this surging demand in healthcare as this way seniors moves into their senior years?
And some of the stuff that I have read raised some questions about, will we have those workers that we need? Will we have the doctors, the nurses, and
right?
Because there are places now where we have shortages.
Exactly, right. Yeah. And so again, that's the question that gets back to the economic question. Is you have a shrinking number of children being born each year, which the population of younger workers gets smaller, eventually starts getting smaller and smaller, unless, of course, at least not everybody can do this, but I mean, the United States, we have, even though we only have a fertility rate of about 1.8%, which is below replacement. Replacement rate's about 2.1 babies per woman. We have about 1.78 now. We still have a growing population. And the reason is because we also have immigration. You have people that are adding to the population. And that, compared to other places like Japan and South Korea and some other countries, which have much lower fertility rates even than we have, but also have very limited immigration, their populations are shrinking and declining, and they're feeling these same issues more acutely than the United States is. So one piece that helps to mitigate some of that challenge in terms of having younger workers and people that are capable of providing healthcare is that you have immigration that allows more people to be in your country and be willing to provide those services.
But lots of wheels are turning here, right? Lots of things are spinning, and that's one of the other issues involved with this, is that we need to understand the complexity of this situation, and that it's not just one solution. Here's what we need to do for this or that. That we've got things that we've got to manage all at the same time. We need to be able to walk and chew gum. We need to be able to spin all those plates. But we human beings are not accustomed to kind of wanting to order the world in that way, are we?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think there's also just some cultural, societal things that will change, and I think they change as the demand for them is there. So, for instance, Melissa and I have been married for 30 some years, going 36, 37 years. We have no children. So if either of us passes on and the one that's left and they have needs, we're not going to have children that are going to be there to watch over us, to figure out what we need and so on. And we're not alone. And we have a large number of people in our generation that have never married, and don't have children. So you have people that are single. What do those people do in terms of end of life issues, and how do they care for themselves? And I can envision, I can see, we talk about these assisted living communities, and also over 55 communities where people can be together. But I could foresee some more communal living arrangements beginning to develop with people that are older, that are wanting to take care of themselves independently of any business or healthcare agency providing it for them. Just changes in how we live, and then that also begins to affect what your housing choices are and what kind of housing people need, that type of thing. So there are some things that are probably unforeseen to us right now in terms of just the way that the culture shifts and how we address some of the issues in front of us.
It's interesting you talked about housing, because one of the things in the midst of the reading that you and I have been doing on this is that right now housing is hot as can be. I mean, it's a seller's market. I have one of my daughters, a childhood friend of hers. I saw her this weekend and we talked a little bit, and she was saying that her parents bought a house in Florida. Of course, Florida is pretty hot when it comes to the housing market right now. They bought it like a year and a half ago, and they want to sell it. And just in a year and a half, it says that they're asking $200,000 more than they bought it for, right?
Right.
And
Right.
right now
Yeah.
that we all know how hot the housing market is, but the reality is the projections are, and again, we don't know for certain, but you know, with the boomer generation uh, dying off,
Right.
housing may become more affordable, but then the question becomes, what does that look like with more and more people who are not married? For example, you know, my
Right.
kids' generation, they're not getting married.
Right.
And if they
Yeah.
are, they're getting married later.
Right.
So what does the housing thing look like? We talk about right now, it's hard for a millennial to afford housing, but boy,
Right.
in another 30 years, that may not be the
Yeah.
case.
Well, and I think one of the articles that you and I saw was talking about the housing market and what's about to occur. The one woman, she's been fairly accurate in predicting a lot of these things developing with baby boomers, was suggesting that she sort of sees this as a inflection point this year, as people my age that are turning 65. We sort of reached the peak of the tsunami here in terms of people reaching 65. That going forward, you're going to see an increasing desire of baby boomers wanting to sell those houses to move on to other types of living arrangements. And you're going to have millennials that are hungry to have houses, that are interested in buying houses. And so the challenge for the baby boomers is, if you want to get to that house that has the bedroom, the bathroom, the washing facilities, and your living space all on one floor with no stairs. Well, there's only a certain amount of those that exist. And if we all start moving for the doors to try to go find those houses at the same time, the price of those houses is going to get really expensive pretty quickly as people all start looking for the same kind of thing. And of course, you talk about developers possibly building, homes, but how quickly, can you adapt to that? So on the one hand, you may want to move quickly. On the other hand, you've got those millennials out there that want to buy houses. So hang into your house a little bit longer, you might be able to get a higher price for your house if you wait a little. And then from the millennial side of this thing, you maybe you should wait just a little bit longer, and then you'll be able to get a better price because the boomers going to be hungry to sell their house. So anyway, it's just that economic dynamic as this begins to unfold. It's hard to predict how all the pieces will play out. But I think the housing market is primed for a really big transformation right now because of the aging issues going on. Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting to figure out. By the way, and we're not going to get into this because we're talking about the silver tsunami, which is now, but millennials, they're a big group too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in another 20 to 30 years, they're going to be where, you and I are right now. And so that's going to present some interesting, who's going to fix these problems, Michael? The people who are going to fix it are the generation that most is affected by it. That's the way this always works.
There you go.
We talk about Social Security, for example, and those of us who don't really have to deal with the implications of that, kick the can down the road. We don't want to make the unpopular decisions. So what will happen is this will get fixed when the generation who is going to be the ones who are going to be on the receiving end, they'll have to fix it. They'll have no choice. This is human nature. This is just not. This is human nature. We tend not to fix. We're not proactive. We just are not proactive about things.
Right.
We wait until the avalanche is coming down the side of the mountain, and then we start to try to figure out what. So will this get fixed? Yes, it'll get fixed, but it'll be the people who have no choice but to fix it.
Right. And part of the reason I have considerable confidence that Medicare and Social Security will get fixed is because it's been true for generations, and it's still true now, probably will be going forward in the future. The older you move up the age spectrum, the more inclined people are to vote and to take political action. Oldest people tend to be the ones who vote the most, and the oldest people are the ones who want that Social Security and they want that Medicare. So
yes, they do.
I think that's where that's the reason I think it will probably get fixed in some year.
I think you're right on that. Hey, let's move in a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah.
And that is, let's talk about, because we always want to bring some kind of Christian context to this as Christians.
Right.
So here we are, living in a population that is aging and that we are a part of. I will say this as a pastor for almost 40 years, that my experience as a pastor is that when people move into those older years, there's all kinds of interesting challenges they face, not just
Yeah.
limitations because they're getting older, but they do, we talk about the term silver tsunami, whether that's an ageist term or not. Well, that it doesn't bother me, Michael, and
Right.
because I told you that if tsunamis wreak havoc and destruction, I don't mind wreaking a little havoc in people's lives.
Right. There you go.
I'm okay with that, uh, as long as it's havoc for the good.
Right.
But you do tend to people get older, they just do tend to feel forgotten.
Yep.
They feel like their best years have passed by them. Nobody comes to them anymore for wisdom or you talked about consulting when people retire. They get to the place where they just feel isolated and forgotten. And I as a
Yeah.
pastor, I know this all too well. So let's talk about this because we're going to be in a place now and going to be continue to be in a place for a while where this older generation is going to require a lot of care. There's going to be things that we're going to have to do if we want to treat our elderly generation well, which we should want to do that, right?
Right.
Remember, the commandment in the Bible to honor your father and mother is not for young children. It's
Right.
meant for adult children to honor their elderly parents, right? Take care of them.
Right.
So as Christians, I mean, how do we, my question for you at this point is, how do we move forward knowing that we do have a responsibility for the generation that that in their day took care of us and saw to our
Yeah.
needs and worked on our behalf and sacrificed on our behalf, and now here they are as Christians. How do we view that?
Well, that's a really good question, and I one of the things I was reflecting on when we were thinking about this topic past couple days was just that the churches I've been a part of over my lifetime, so often the central focus is, well, we have to get more young families into our church. We have to get kids, and we got to have children's programs and youth programs. Otherwise, our church is going to die if we don't have one. And there are some elements of truth to that. You want to have programs for children, and the reality is that not just the church I'm thinking about, but more generally, we have a declining birth rate. If you want a more balanced population where we're more like replacement rate, which is considered probably healthy for most societies, you're going to have more children, people having more children. And if people are going to have more children, they have to be born into an environment where the parents feel like they can survive themselves having more than one child or two children. So we can't, I'm not making this an either or a zero sum game that we can't do more than one thing at once. But the focus has always seemed to be about children. And we are in an aging population with people feeling not just at senior years, but all across the age spectrums, more isolated, more lonely, more disconnected from others. And so it seems to me that the church is one of those ideal third spaces where we should be providing opportunities for people to come together. I'll tell you one thing, and I've been reflecting on this, and I don't have any conclusions about it, but it's just something I've been thinking on. Melissa and I have joined a part of this program. It's a 5-week program where we get together for one day and basically meet for all day on Thursdays. That's sponsored by a program by an agency called Mid-America Regional Council, and it's called Give 5. And what they're doing is they are taking us around to 4 or 5 different entities around the city where you could volunteer your time and activity, and across the whole spectrum of things, working in a museum, refugee resettlement, food waste, a company that helps address food waste, that kind of thing. But these are places where they are hoping to do, the program is hoping to do 2 things. One is to help seniors. I should mention this. You have to be 60 or older to be a part of this program. It's helping seniors find other seniors and that they have common interests with, and then also helping them find opportunities where they can contribute their time and become part of a community at a volunteer agency where they can find community there in doing something productive in their life. So they're both contributing to community, but they're also getting the benefit of feeling connected and developing relationships, that kind of thing. Something along that line what would the church's response be in terms of talking to seniors? How do they help seniors feel connected, not just to each other, but also productively in their communities? I talked about possible changes in housing in the future. Do churches have some way of helping to foster some sort of community living together for people that are single and isolated in their 60s or 70s and don't know how to connect and find other people? I don't know, but I think rather than just focusing purely on we have to get more children here and younger adults so that we have somebody to take care of us as we die.
Yeah.
Which for younger adults, that's how it feels like when you walk into church and you have everybody latch on to you that they want to be there. That
Yeah.
you're not there because they have an interest in you. It's more about what they're getting from you. That becomes a very negative feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, what would the church's response be to the issues that seniors are facing today? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something else that in my experience as a pastor is it's a lot harder to get parents of young families actively involved in the church in a way, they're busy. They're raising their kids. They're raising their kids. They're taking them to soccer practice. They're taking them to this or that or the other. And they've got all kinds of things to challenge. Also, that that they don't have the financial resources because raising children costs money. And you get people who retire, and all of a sudden they've got some time, and they have resources, financial resources. And I think sometimes that we and again, I don't want to make this sound like we just want these older folks to use them, because that's not true. But all of a sudden, you've got people who can contribute to the life of the church in a way that they couldn't when they were in their 30s. And, I think we miss not only offering a kind of vital community to these persons you talk about, the aging who feel isolated and things like that, not only to offer them, but I always say, it's a two-way street. It's always, yes, you have a lot to offer us, but we hope we can offer something to you too.
Right, sure.
And that's the way that I think ministry works, that good ministry works, is that here we are to offer to you the things that you need in this stage of your life, but we hope that in return that you'll offer stuff to us, because I think most of us, not everybody, but most of us want to give. I think we want to contribute. I think we want to offer something. And so, if folks who are older go into a church where not only know they'll be taken care of if if they're in the hospital or they need something, but to know that they can actually offer something to the church. That's what they want to do. And I do agree with you. The other thing about when we talk about the youth, and I'm for reaching out to youth and young people, but the reality is that with the aging of the population, churches, individual congregations are competing for a smaller share of the pie all the time. Because the reality is most churches, 90+% of churches, are not really attracting unchurched families. They're not attracting, they're attracting churched families from other congregations.
There you go.
So our youth group is growing. Well, where did most of those youth come from? Well, the church down here and the church over there and the church over there. Okay. People church hop all the time. That's what they do. But as far as reaching out to young people and families that aren't engaged in a church, we're not doing a really good job of that, Michael. We're just not.
I agree. Yeah. And I think there's some creative thinking that we need to do. I keep coming back to this anecdote. About 10, 12 years ago, I was in Denver, and I was in a hotel, and I just happened to see a local news report where they were talking about an elder hostel that they had. And they had I think it was a grandparents program or something like that, where you went and stayed at the elder hostel, but you could also bring your grandkids and you could enroll, and they have programs all through the week where the grandparents and the grandkids participated in these programs all week long. And I mean, the place filled up almost instantly, and they have more demand than they could possibly handle for this. And this is like the second or third time they've done it. And so the news reporter was asking the grandparents, interviewing one of the grandparents, and they were saying, do you enjoy this? Is it a good program? Oh, yes, they just raved all about it. She says, well, why do you think this has been so popular? And she says, well, it's because the grandparents and their grandkids really get to bond together because we have a common enemy, their parents.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Carol and I started noticing a decade ago or so because our kids were out of the house. They're grown up and out of the house. So Carol and I would be able to take vacations, just the two of us, and we could do it at times of the year that weren't summer, right?
Right.
And so we would go to a place in the fall or anything, to a resort area or something. And we noticed the number of grandparents and grandchildren
Yeah.
on vacation together. And
Right.
now, assuming that those older folks weren't just older parents, but the fact
Right.
that most of them were grandparents, that the grandkids are being taken by the grandparents to go somewhere to have some fun while the parents are left to work
Right.
or get some of their own downtime or whatever. The other thing we haven't talked about, we don't have time to talk about, is how the shape of the household has
Yeah.
been changing in America the last 20 years, 25 years, so that
Right.
now you've got more than two generations under the same roof. Or if
Right.
they're not under the same roof, they're local and involved in each other's lives. I mean, how many people that I know
Right.
who have grandchildren, who are my age or a little older, have grandchildren, how many days a week they spend watching
Yeah.
grandchildren who are local.
Right.
And I can remember when I was a kid, my grandparents were local, and we would go over to their house and things like that. But they came to my baseball game that I played maybe two times in a summer.
Right.
Whereas now it's every time, it's every game. I think things have just, and
Yeah.
I'm not critiquing or
No.
anything. I'm just simply
Right.
saying
It
there's
just
a
changed.
change that's happening.
Right. Right.
And there's just more of that kind of involvement in a way that we didn't experience 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So
Right.
how that works into this whole dynamic is just another interesting question.
Yeah. And so I guess my thought that I was coming to there is then, so you have seniors that are feeling isolated. They don't have a way to contribute. You're talking about wanting to have younger children to get them educated in the faith. Is there some way that you connect those two things together? Seniors being involved in the lives of children are there ways that the church
Yeah.
can contribute to that cross-generational connection and providing those? And I don't have a specific idea in mind, but I'm just thinking that if we need to be more creative about how we realize what's going on. And part of the reasons we're talking about this, like you said, is there's the abstract demographic economic questions at the 50,000 foot level. But when we start talking about the church, that to me, the whole reason for reflecting on that 50,000 foot level is to think about what that means here and now for us
Right.
that are in the church and in our communities. And the issue of aging, the issues of isolation, loneliness, and just as with everybody, the existential questions as you get older. Life is getting shorter. What was the meaning of all this? Did I live a good life? Didn't I do a good life? What do I want to do the rest of it now that this part is past? There's a lot of soul searching that goes on. I mean, I don't know if it's still true, but particularly for men, that one of the highest suicide rates for men was like between 65 and 70. People retire, worked all their lives, and then they retire, and there's no meaning to it anymore. And so there's a lot of those kind of questions. So I think there's many different avenues that the church could take to respond.
Yeah, that's right. Even if we're not nihilists, Michael, we all at times stare into the abyss at some point.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
we wonder about it. And so the church, I do think, maybe to wrap this up, that there is value in churches strategically working in offering ministry to people who are older, and to say, we want the young people, we want that, but we also, Jesus needs people in all stages of life, right?
Right.
And people have something to offer in all stages of life, so the church needs to be intentional about that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, the silver tsunami. You and I are headed to the shore, Michael.
We are at the peak.
wave. We're at the peak of the wave. It's headed to the shore.
That's right.
All right, my friend. All right. Well, always good to have conversation with you, friends. We are glad that you joined us today. By the way, before you leave, if you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe. Costs nothing to do that. If you're following, if you're listening on the podcast, please follow us. That doesn't cost anything either. And that helps us out. So we would appreciate that. This is Faith Seeking Understanding. Allan Bevere with Michael Cruz, and the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. So friends, keep seeking.